so we are all well seated comfortably. And let's start with the panel. So let's have a quick round of introduction by our panelists, starting with you, Sydney.
Thank you so much. Hey, everybody. My name is Sydney Lai. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO of Gaia. What we're doing at Gaia is we are building AI inference and portable context. So, mosquito will get you.
Hi, guys. I'm Kenny. I'm co-founder of Manta Network. We are the largest modular L2 on top of Ethereum. Fun fact about myself, I was the teaching assistant for Gary Gensler the year before he became SEC chairman when he was at MIT.
Wow. My name is John Goldschmidt. I'm with Magenta Labs, actually. We focus on strategic growth and BD efforts under Web3 Foundation, which is Polkadot's foundation. And I guess we focus mostly on like AI DePIN at Magenta Labs, AI DePIN, consumer type use cases. There are others that focus on other verticals within the industry, but that's Magenta.
Hello everyone, my name is Juliet. I'm a fund partner at NewTribe Capital. So our motto is invest in the people, so we are like active supporters of our portfolio companies, including NodeOps. Like we need to tell some facts about ourselves, right? Or it's just like
Take it on.
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it. Just
I can do it. So fun fact about myself, I can speak fluent Mandarin. So.
真的吗？
对，
哇哦，
你们知道吗？
当然了。
很多人都知道。
So this is going to get super interesting and I think completely energy packed. And I think we would need some translations in between, Juliet. All right. So myself, I'm Sheena. I am the chief of staff at NodeOps. Prior to NodeOps, I was serving for a decade at EY, then worked at a couple of more places in the Web3 space. And here NodeOps is providing the infrastructure for the builders and the developers, your one-stop solution. All right. So I mean, of course, you guys know that we are talking about the compute and connectivity in Asia's DePIN ecosystem. But before we hit that, just, just be free, whoever wants to take up the question first. We're not going to go by the sequence or anything. But how do you see the Southeast Asian market compared to the other markets? And is there something very specific that excites you in the DePIN ecosystem in the C region?
I'll start first. When we are looking at like why people are coming to Asia, right? Like there are two major goals. First of all, everyone knows that there is they're looking for some capital and investment. So of course you can see there are a lot of whales in Asia. But the most important probably for DePIN, AI and connectivity that it's the biggest retail market overall, right? So we are talking about the customer, we are talking about the end users, and of course, it doesn't matter if you're building, whatever you're building, you need to be product oriented and you need to understand who are your customers and how to get them engaged. So it's a big field where you can just do the proper go-to-market strategy. There you can do the proper marketing in order to have a product which is really used, right? So that's why especially Korean market, like a Chinese market, like a Southeast Asian market, it's all about the users and people there are quite active. And we've seen it for a long time. And of course, that's something we can't neglect. So that's why, wherever you build DePIN, where you have the physical device engaged specifically, it's becoming super popular in Asia.
Yeah, I guess I would, the retail is huge. I think the stat is 1 in 3 people in Korea, for example, in crypto. If you look at the States and generally, I guess in the West, it's it might be that number if you look at under 40 male demographic or something like that. But here it's 1 in 3 people. So there's obviously, and you walk down the street, there's obviously a great comfort with technology. People are willing to try new things, willing to get out of their comfort zone a little bit. So I think that obviously lends itself to adoption of DePIN and AI and all the things we're talking about. And then I think the other thing specifically for DePIN is the proximity for hardware production. So as different, in order to roll out and utilize this, these networks and these basically IoT, being able to test and deploy the hardware is important too, and right where that it's all produced and distributed.
In terms of, I guess, production and distribution, that's specifically on the DePIN side that I'm I think is really interesting because I think DePIN, it's come through many iterations in the crypto space, right? Like I remember farming or mining Sia coin back in 2014, 2015. And so the idea of decentralized storage, it existed like a decade ago. It's never been able to compete because of unit economics, right? Like the question at the end of the day is does an average user want to spend, double or triple the amount of money to do decentralized storage, or do they just want to use Amazon AWS? Do they just want to use Google Drive or something? And the answer has always been, Google Drive or some Web2 consumer product. And so I think the challenge that DePIN has always had and continues to have is on the unit economic side, because how can you compete against these existing centralized solutions in a way that's cost effective? And the more decentralized you become, the more inefficient you become. And so the idea of thinking about how to build this cost-efficient hardware is extremely important. And it's not going to happen in the West, because the reality of it is that, when you build things in the West, they just cost way more. So I think a lot of the innovation on the cost savings and efficiency side is going to happen in the Asia region, and that's where the adoption is going to really drive. And then on the AI side, which, maybe it's mutually exclusive, maybe it's not. Prior to Manta, I was working on a healthcare AI company, and we were building predictive models to detect rare forms of disease. And so what we did was, we would go into hospitals and we'd say, hey, we can detect kidney cancer much faster and much more accurately than doctors can. And so, that's really interesting. But one of the things you realize about, these AI models is that they're only as good as the data you train them on. And most of the healthcare data that we have that's already available in well-formatted, forms on the internet are Western data. It's, trained on models of people that live in the United States, live in Europe. They may not necessarily apply to Asia, especially different parts of Asia. And so I think there's an opportunity in terms of using DePIN for this type of data collection for much more precise models that you can train in the future, specifically for Asian people.
Something you talked about, which was the unit economics of being able to produce and distribute these products. And then I think John, you also talked about what the adoption looks like in the Asian markets. So you originally asked the question of, what does it look like for DePIN to enter in this Asian market and why there's such a high adoption rate? I think there's two things. One observation is that it's a mobile first society. And I think number two, there's actually an appetite for consumer gadgets. So when we're looking at when we're mining Sia back in 2014, that is a very different consumer product. If you want to call it a consumer product, it's not. But I think the Asian markets, in a very short sentence, is that there is an appetite for a lot of consumer gadgets. And you look at the fast churn of Alibaba's, etc., a lot of these white label gadgets that can provide some sort of value, may it be technical value or at the very least entertainment value.
Absolutely. In fact, I personally observe, that when, like you mentioned about the gadget usage that's there in Southeast Asia or in the Asian countries is much larger compared to the West. And of course, cannot deny the kind of talent, the kind of developers and the builders that you will find in this market is definitely higher compared to the other markets. And there is always a welcoming when it comes to, projects which are in the DePIN sector and essentially in the AI sector. Though the West would be much ahead of us sometimes on certain aspects, but the building that comes up and the kind of, I think, the aptitude that people over here inhabit in them, I think that's completely unique. Very well. So moving ahead and connecting this, similar, conversation that we've been having. So if you see over here, you guys are from ecosystem, L1s, and Juliet is from a VC fund. You guys are different pieces of the same puzzle, which is trying to contribute towards the ecosystem. So how do you feel when it comes to infrastructure, it falls a part of any and every project, right? You be a gaming project, you are into any sector, but DePIN is your basic rail that you create. So do you see any challenges, when you're supposed to be when you're building up your project from the aspect, like you mentioned, Kenny, that you were saying that if you look at the centralized ones, they might be expensive, but sometimes the trust on a decentralized infra is difficult. So Kenny, first to you, when you built up Manta, how did you feel that, if things were much easier on the infra side, or was it like an easy, aspect, a no-brainer that you can just go for something like a GCP or an AWS?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it kind of pokes the heart of centralization versus decentralization. And anyone who's kind of followed Vitalik's sort of train of thought over the years, right? I think one of his most famous pieces was about the blockchain trilemma, right? And this is the balance between all of this sort of decentralization, security, scalability, and the conclusion here is that you can't have all three. Right, you can have two of the three, but you can't necessarily have all of them. And so I think that philosophy very much applies to the approach to whether or not you choose centralized or decentralized as a pathway. And I don't think it's black and white. I think Ethereum's solution for resolving this trilemma is the L1 itself is focused on the decentralization and the security. And then we have L2s like Manta in existence that focus on the scalability. And that scalability means that we can also have the shared security on the Ethereum side, but in the interim, it also means that the L2s themselves are, frankly, a lot more centralized, right? But that centralization allows us to get to market now, allows us to provide this scalability layer now so that these use cases, these applications can build on top. And ultimately, I think it all boils down to how much value can we provide to the world in the form of use cases, right? Because no one cares how decentralized something is. I mean, like we do, but we don't represent the world, right? And so most people only care if you can provide them value. And so, being able to get these use cases out there in a usable, scalable fashion, right? There's that sort of decision that you have to make. And so at least from the L2 perspective, I think I can speak for most L2s because we do the same thing, right? We're on GCP, we're on AWS, right? And so I think the infrastructure side for us today is not that much of an issue, but it becomes an issue when you think long-term because you do have to start thinking about censorship resistance. You do have to think about policy, different governmental policy as well. And so these factors will play a huge role, I think, in the long term. So I do believe that, as we continue to kind of evolve as an industry, and even on the L2 side, it becomes more and more decentralized, then the importance of DePIN continues to grow there.
Very well, yeah. Sean, would you like to add something? Because
Something.
oh yeah, sure. Why not?
So sorry.
No, go ahead.
Something came to mind as you were discussing, and I think another reason why we, in the AI space, if you will, are really approaching the DePIN aspect. Of course, there's that monetization side, there's that go-to-market side, but I think people also want a tangible way to touch AI. That's it. Yeah.
That's actually a very wonderful thought.
Yeah.
So I can add on that. So basically, exactly, sometimes the decentralization matter, but sometimes it doesn't matter if it's centralized or not. Because overall, it should be the product approach. If you're solving some bottlenecks or you're not solving the bottlenecks and you can deliver something that people need, right? So for me, Hyperliquid is, for example, a good example where just I know that a lot of people they can't pass the KYC in centralized exchangers. And then, is it decentralized or is it centralized? Nobody cares as long as they just can do perpetual trading or the exchange, right? Without any KYC. So that's why it became a popular. Same for other things. I remember there was a wave of decentralized storage, and a lot of things decentralized. But we were talking about retail. So exactly, for me as a retail user, I do not need any decentralized solution. I don't care if my pictures on my iPhone is stored somewhere in decentralized manner or centralized. And then it comes especially for enterprises, right? And data is the power. The amount of data that you have is exactly that is the power. Where we should have some proper kind of privacy, security, and decentralization to a certain extent. Because of course you can't keep it decentralized, but there should be something where it goes beyond retail, and it's just something where we do need the AI.
I would just add from our Polkadot's perspective as a blockchain. All the things we're talking about here, there are many layers to the stack. There's a lot of key components that have to come together. And I think from the beginning, when Gavin was conceiving and rolling out, as Polkadot came together, this was the vision, right? Is to be able to bring in an identity and your assets, and bring in also privacy into the equation, so you can build. It's modular. It's perfectly modular, and also everything interoperates. So I think that's that's a big part of what we're talking about here when we're getting into DePIN and AI.
Yeah. I mean, of course, I can't differ from you guys when you say that, the end user doesn't really care it's centralized or decentralized. It always matters at how you're getting out the solution for them. So continuing in relation to the same, conversation that we're having here. So when it comes to, you looking at it from an infra side, what is the major, bottleneck that you kind of suffer? Is it more like getting the access, getting the reliability, making it cost effective? So what is that, those things that you like to have it in the checklist when you are looking at the infra side of things?
I actually think that oftentimes infra is actually kind of a solved problem. One of the things that I've seen that's quite difficult is explaining to non-technical teams how to implement the infra with a very specific use case. So I actually think that go-to-market is a lot more difficult than just figuring out the architecture itself. I'll keep it short.
The bottleneck I see, it's basically the adoption overall. The adoption is that there is and then we are talking about infrastructure, it always goes layer by layer. If we just trace the whole market, there was the first, even what we discussed Polkadot. So the first layer of infrastructure is built, and then the industry is evolving, right? So we are progressing, we have new users, so we have new use cases, and then again, we need to update the infrastructure. We need to improve the infrastructure to be able to serve the new community, the new users, the new people, the new products that's happening, right? Like, for example, now we have the big institutional adoption. So that's why, again, we need to adjust the infrastructure that's been built in order to serve their needs. And of course, that's why the topics like privacy and security is becoming so popular in the market. Because before, we were like a group of Web3 enthusiasts who tried to create the movement. Now the movement is here, and now it's becoming mainstream, and now we see that the government are adopting cryptocurrency. So that's why the new layer of the infrastructure still needs to be built in order to serve the new community and the new users who are coming into the space.
Yeah, I mean, I would say something that's really important here is the cold start problem, right? And I think this is exactly maybe with the go-to-market in Polkadot in particular was there was this parachain concept and parachain auction, and it made the technology rather inaccessible. And I think we recognized that and saw that back then there were a number of other market factors at the time, but point is, since then, Polkadot has transitioned into this agile core time model, which means as a founder, as an application, if you're spinning up your own chain or whatever, you can come in and just take the throughput that you need, and not have to worry about, right now I only need a little bit, and but I have to make a huge investment. With Polkadot, it's not the case. You can come in and just pay for what you need, and then scale up, week by week as you need it. So I think that, from the perspective of infrastructure, I think that solves a big problem in terms of today, this is very, nascent. We don't need a ton of resources, but we can start small and then grow from there. So that's kind of what comes to mind.
I think from the perspective of a guy who's been in infrastructure for the past 5 years, crypto infrastructure is a joke. It's just pretty pathetic. In many different ways, right? The first of which is, I think, if a lot of people like to compare crypto infrastructure and L1s and L2s to cloud computing and AWS and Microsoft Azure and stuff. But when you have servers on Microsoft Azure and then one day you say, oh, you know what? I don't want these servers anymore. AWS is giving me a better price. you can move your software over to AWS, spin up the same Linux instance, and have it up and running, right? Yeah, sure, there's a migration process, but like, you don't see that in Web3, right? Whether you're building in Polkadot, or whether you're building in Ethereum, or whether you're building in Solana, or whether you're building on Sui, like, you can't just port over like your Rust code over to Ethereum, right? It's impossible. It's like a weird level of vendor lock-in that's like in both the infrastructure layer as well as the middleware. And I think that's sort of a symptom of a much larger problem that most users in crypto experience today, which is liquidity fragmentation. Right, like you basically are jumping from chain to chain, and you're trying to farm and get as much yield as you can, and just to take your money from one chain to the next. Like, yeah, sure, it's self custody, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Right? Like underneath it, you have to bridge, and you have to pay gas fees, and then you have to buy the native token on this other chain, and then you have to do all this stuff, right? And so, like, I think like when it comes to scalability, when it comes to like what makes good infrastructure, I think at the end of the day, all that matters about good infrastructure is that it works whether you have one user or whether you have 100 million users. And I can say that for Web 2, but I can't say that for Web 3, right? Like, just to give you guys some numbers here, Solana, the biggest, most popular use case on Solana for the past year has undeniably been Pump Fun. Pump Fun at its peak had about 200,000 daily active users. Like, that's peanuts. Like, the number 200,000 sounds great to us because, we're playing in this microcosm of like maybe, 100,000 real users and like bajillion bots. But, an app like Duolingo on the App Store, right? It's not even a top 10 app. It's just an average app on the App Store, has 20 million daily active users. And so I don't think any L1 or L2 can scale to 20 million daily active users by itself today, just to service one Duolingo. And on the App Store, we know that there are millions of Duolingos out there, right? There's Instagram, there's TikTok, which are, bajillion more daily active users than Duolingo. So like, we're still in extreme nascency in terms of this infrastructure side. And, you might say, oh, well, this blockchain can get 5 million TPS. Yeah, it gets 5 million TPS on paper. But in reality, right, like, we've already seen this battle tested and it hasn't worked out well. There was this one era, or not era, but this trend called inscriptions, right? More so, it was hyped more in Asia than it was in the West. But inscriptions, right? Like, they started on Bitcoin, and then they started making their way over to Ethereum L2s, right? And all these Ethereum L2s, what happened? When inscriptions hit them, their blocks stopped producing because they could not handle the throughput of simple inscriptions. Fun fact, Manta did not, because we were using Celestia for data availability, so that increased our throughput by a significant factor. So we were safe. But, I mean, like, how safe were we, right? Like, can we handle 20 million daily active users without significantly increasing gas fees, at least? Probably not. So I think we still have a really long way to go for infra.
Very well said, Kenny. In fact, you took the entire discussion on our different... Yeah, John, go ahead.
I'll just say one thing. I mean, to talk our book. I'll push back. First of all, mythical games is on Polkadot. There are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of active daily users playing FIFA Rivals, NFL Rivals. These are all users that have wallets or minting NFTs on a regular basis. So I think that's a pretty solid Web 2 to Web 3 use case, or pretty solid kind of user adoption. The other thing is there's something on, if you look it up, it's called the spamming. There was basically a spamming of Polkadot chain where there was actual live testing that went up to 173,000 TPS on Polkadot. So it's pretty robust. I think there is some battle testing going on there, and I would say that the way that Polkadot's designed probably can handle these kind of things.
So yeah, I mean, we debated a little bit, but I mean, you opened a new chapter, Kenny. Like, honestly, like, when you were mentioning, I could also recall that myself, like, I have probably served a decade in EY, which is like a Big Four, doing very traditional way of, working. And I think a couple of days back, NodeOps launched a very convenient app, which is called as safesend.io. And Naman, I think till date has been pushing me to use it. It's like a very simplified tool which actually allows you when you're sending a transaction, sometimes you send it on the wrong network, right? So that ensures that you don't do those kind of errors. And I think adoption in that case, again, from me, because, working always in a very traditional way of doing things, I am still a little, scared to sometimes use it. So, of course, Kenny, you mentioned that, the kind of like Web2 users or an app store, like the kind of downloads would be any day, much higher than what is happening. And we guys have our own very small universe. And when we see like 90% of our universe is using, we feel that adoption is happening. But yes, we are still a long way to go in that.
Yeah, but one good thing Penny actually mentioned, I just want to highlight, because we are talking again, the new layer, the new amount of users, but are the chains ready for the new amount of users, right? For example, I got a friend who's building an application on Near, and then they've got millions of people doing some transactions on Near at the same time. So the chain went down. So there was a good crash test for the chain itself. So I believe the same, right? We are talking about adoption. We are talking that we need to bring millions of users. But yeah, the good example that you mentioned. So if Polkadot is capable to proceed transactions of that many users at the same time, that is great. Otherwise, we are still on the way forward to improve the infrastructure and to build the more mature layer of the infrastructure, which is they could be adaptable for the financial institution and for corporates.
One thing that I think is really important here too is gas fees on Polkadot. It's not metered, it's not paid at time of execution. So there's not a problem with how active the network is being a limiting factor. The throughput is paid for upfront through the core time that I mentioned earlier. So I think that bit of abstraction is really important.
Yep. And then we're talking about abstraction, and end user, they should not care what is on the back end. Right? That's what, for example, we just discussed why I like NodeOps, because you're a billion for users for people, so they do not need to have specific knowledges on how to operate the nodes itself, initially, right? So that's what we need. We need to provide the perfect UI UX, the good interface, the very flexible experience for users, just to do things that they want to do in order to proceed with certain actions. So EVM, non-EVM. Connecting your MetaMask, do some transaction, off-ramp, on-ramp. So, and I remember there was a panel we spoke about mass adoption, and we talked about CKP, FAG, or whatever. It's and then I said, guys, what are we finally they're talking about? Is it the mass adoption everybody's looking at? And
FAG. We need that. We want it now.
Crazy words that no one people look at when you're talking about.
Yeah.
Are you from this planet?
I can totally relate that, Juliet. In fact, that's really nice of you to even bring up. With NodeOps, our always endeavor has been to make it very simplified. In the morning, we were talking about the zero-G node deployment, and I just told Juliet here, there's 2 steps to do. Just do it.
Exactly. There is a practical example. I've got a zero-G nodes, and I'm can I operate it on NodeOps? Yeah, for sure. Just here's the link, go and operate.
Yeah, I just gave her one link she had to click. So that actually also brings up an important aspect that, sometimes folks are afraid to use it. For example, we have this TG bot now that's there. You can just use a couple of commands on the TG itself, deploy your node. It's become as easy as that. So there is that power, but it's more about education so that we're able to adopt and we're able to bring in that, larger base, which is kind of afraid to come towards, using these kind of agentic tools. I think once we're able to get more education, more use cases live, do live streaming and let people know the power of infrastructure that builders like you, us are bringing, I think it's going to be much faster adoption. So, of course, that was my next question about the adoption curve, but I think you guys were brilliant enough to take up my space and ask questions and answer them. You guys have been doing fabulous here. So let's move on to the last question of the panel, right? And it would be basically if you can highlight nothing really, you don't have to really specifically, emphasize on DePIN, but in general for your project, what's the narrative that you're trying to bring now? What is the focus more about? And what is very exciting for Q4 2025 or early 2026? Sydney, yeah.
I think one of the things that we often forget about in Web3 is the larger AI narrative. I know this is more of a DePIN question, but I think someone had mentioned Oh, I think it was Jay. Yeah, he did. You know, we were all at the KBW conference in front of like the space coin booth. There was like this little robot dude that was walking around. Yeah, you remember that guy? Right? There was that little guy who was walking around. I'm staring at this little guy and I was like, oh, I feel like in Web3, we don't often talk about reaching AGI, right? This like artificial intelligence that can essentially emulate human intelligence. And I think it might have been Jake, but it was like, you know, we also often forget that as we're making decentralized software really for DePIN, for robotics, for etc. We forget the narrative in Web3, and so I think this is just a long way of saying, you know, for Gaia specifically, we're not an L1, we're not L2, we are potable context for the AI application layer. Because without that context, what ends up happening is that we're still in a SaaS dominant world where you still need a project manager, you still need to have credential logins, you still need to update your ticket every day, you still forget to update your ticket every day. Everything's outdated at some point. And so really for, you know, the remaining of the year into 2026, what we're really focused on is how do we bring this potable context and a shared index containment of indexed AI context so that can be shared across different applications so they can reach a consumer market, so they can reach an enterprise market. I'll leave it at that.
Perfect.
Over on Manta, I don't think we are specifically focused on, you know, DePIN or AI because we've traditionally been more of like a general purpose L2. But I think, you know, being a general purpose L2, especially now, the infrastructure layer is pretty much a commodity for scalability solutions. That's my thesis. And so, you know, what are we very much focused on? I think we are very keen on thinking about what are the next big use cases in crypto. And so we are experimenting along that line. But one of the things I really want to pinpoint for, you know, some of the builders in here and how you might want to be thinking about your next product is trends, they come and go, right? Like you got ICOs, then you got NFTs, and then you got inscriptions, and then all this other stuff that was like the thing for 3 months before the next thing became the thing for 3 months, right? But you know, throughout all these waves of trends and stuff, what has always and will continue to exist? Financial tools. Like that is the heart and soul of blockchain and crypto and the value that we provide to end users, right? I don't care if you tell me it's SocialFi or GameFi or all this other stuff. All these FIs, I think at the end of the day, are still just DeFi. DeFi wrapped in, you know, pretending to be a social network that competes with Twitter. DeFi wrapped in pretending to be something else that is really fun and engaging, but at the end of the day, you're just farming for points to earn airdrops for what? Financial purposes. So, you know, what we're thinking about and what we're doubling down on over on the Manta side is thinking about, okay, how do we take advantage of this new opportunity of an influx of not just institutional adoption, but governmental adoption? And how do we build the DeFi tools and rails for those types of customers? We already have some products internally that I think are going to be extremely amazing. We're working with really brilliant minds, right? Brian, who's the co-founder of Risk Zero. You guys might know Boundless, right? Risk Zero built Boundless. Rich, who's the co-founder of GSR. You know, these are the guys that are helping us with building some of these next generation DeFi tools for that next wave of adoption.
I completely agree with you on the point that, like, unfortunately, a lot of people are falling into the narratives as well. So, like, whatever narratives is existing in the market, other people try to do the same. And then, again, the narratives are coming and they go. But what people want to see is something tangible overall, right? Like, tangible, it doesn't matter. Like, it's a very good use case that you mentioned, like a payment. Like, if I can make a transaction from one currency to another currency, like in a few minutes, that's good. That is something tangible, right? If, for example, talking about DeFi for the government, if I can have the basket of tokenized shares, stocks, any kind of gold, like any other commodities and assets, and I can just generate some yield on that, That is the practical example, right? Because I understand what is the asset, what it's all about, and then above all, I'm using that technology to generate the yield upon the tangible assets that we have, right? Tangible in the sense that robotics were mentioned. Again, you see the robot. For example, I'm wearing this tool for the healthcare, whatever. It's like, if there is any way for me to collect some point, or I see the robot and they're like, I understand that there is the combination of technologies, and overall it should be called like innovation. Like that is the very popular term that we are using in the UAE, and like the government is supporting innovation. And innovation is again Web3, AI, DePIN, whatever it is. And if you use the innovation to serve your people, to serve your customers, to serve community, to serve government overall, so that's what we need to achieve.
Yeah. So at first I wasn't sure, to put a bow on it and answer the question, because I was going to say something that's very important, which is the fact that, for end of year and early next year, Polkadot is launching effectively the L1 base chain that will be EVM compatible. So that's a huge development. It means any smart contract Solidity can deploy directly on Polkadot. You don't have to spin up your own parachain. You don't have to join another one. So that's a really big thing for the ecosystem. But I think what actually Sydney was talking about the robot that was for Peak actually, which is a parachain Polkadot, and I think this all goes back to, and then Mythical and the things we talked about. I mean, I think abstraction is what it's all about. So people might be comfortable with technology, but they don't have to be technologists to engage with blockchain. Blockchain is meant to be unseen infrastructure. With things happening that people want to have a reason to engage with. Peak has a vertical farm with robots that are literally farming vegetables, and you can invest in those robots and earn a return based on the vegetables they farm, right? Like it's as easy, like it's farming. This is like age-old industry combined with technology that allows people to, access it and participate. So I think those are the things that really excite me, and I think that's how kind of we're thinking about the space, which is what like truly brings it to the masses. It's not talking about the blockchain. It's not talking about tokens. It's talking about, real world use cases.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's what I like about panels. You kind of drop some alphas as well, so we know what Polkadot is coming up with. Kenny, you were completely insightful, telling us so many things and opening some truth bombs, as I can say. Thanks, Juliet, for always being wonderful, and your energy always lights up any panel. So thank you for that. And Sydney, super nice to have you and, get those very key, highlights from your side. Thank you so much for being on the panel today. Thank you, guys. And that's a wrap for the panel right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.